Richard Dawkins. Let's talk about what he did this week, because I wasn't sure how to bring this up, but I feel like if the guy who is the biggest representative of atheism in the world, not because he got elected, but just because whatever, he wrote the book on the subject, quite literally, and he's the guy everyone goes to. He's the name that comes up when you think of atheists. So when he does something in the name of reason, I feel like it's something worth addressing. So if you're not familiar with what he did recently, he launched this podcast. It's called The Poetry of Reality, which is a nice title. And it would be really cool if he used his platform, his massive, gigantic platform, to talk about reality, which I guess could mean explaining science to people who may not be interested in a Neil deGrasse Tyson sort of way. That would be great. If he could explain evolution in a way that he does so brilliantly, that would be really cool. If he's interviewing other scientists in fields that he's not an expert in, that would be cool too, because he's Richard Dawkins. He could probably get any scientist he wants to talk to him to explain stuff. All of that would, explain reality in perhaps a really beautiful way. That would be awesome. But he hasn't done that yet. So far, the first original episode, like where it wasn't one of his old lectures or anything like that, was with Helen Joyce, who is basically someone who's made transphobia like her thing. Her background, by the way, is a mathematician, so I'm not sure what that transition was. It's not like she has expertise in any clinical way when it comes to trans people, but this is just the thing she's decided to make her life work. So Richard Dawkins decided to interview Helen Joyce. So who is Helen Joyce? She is someone who has previously said trans people who transition are damaged. That's her word. She has said they are a huge problem to the sane world. She thinks reducing the number of people who transition is a moral imperative. And if you've ever heard that there's like controversy among the New York Times because they publish a lot of anti-trans articles. Well, a review of Helen Joyce's book was published in the Times. It was written by someone who is also notoriously transphobic and published by an editor who's been accused of transphobia as well. So Helen Joyce is like in the middle of all of this. So like if Richard Dawkins wanted to talk to her to call her out on that, okay, I can make a case for why that would be a good idea. Neil deGrasse Tyson has appeared on like Ben Shapiro's podcast to set him straight on the science. And again, I know there are debates about whether or not doing something like that is a good idea. I can understand the arguments on both sides of that. But like if Neil deGrasse Tyson goes to talk sense to Ben Shapiro's audience, or someone appeared on Joe Rogan's podcast, again, to set the record straight, I can understand why that might be appealing. You want to reach outside your circles. You want to reach people who might not otherwise hear you. But that is not what Dawkins was doing. He brought Helen Joyce on because he wanted to tell her how awesome she was. And I do have some clips I'm going to share with you in a second. Here's the first one. Let's see if I could pull this up. So here's what Dawkins was saying. He's saying there are some things in science that are on a spectrum, like is someone fat or skinny? Well, it's not one or the other. There's a whole spectrum of that. When it comes to height, is someone tall or short? It's on a spectrum. But then he says that doesn't apply to sex. Here is that clip, and then we'll talk about it.
I'm used to continua wherever I look. I mean, there's tall versus short, fat versus thin, old versus young. All these things are a smooth continuum. The one thing that isn't is sex. I mean, sex really is binary. There's no question about it. You're either male or female, and it's absolutely clear. You can do it on gamete size. You can do it on chromosomes. And so it is, to me, as a biologist, distinctly weird that people can simply declare, I am a woman, though I have a penis. That seems to me to be a strange distortion of language, because language is useful as something to express your thoughts clearly.
So that's clip one. sex really is binary, he says. And I'm trying to phrase this well because, look, I'm not pretending to be an expert on this subject either. But Dawkins says over and over, he acknowledges that there are people who are intersex. He acknowledges that not everyone is XX or XY chromosomes. Not everyone presents the same way. He acknowledges that and then goes in the other direction and just says, yeah, but I'm used to thinking it's binary. You're either this or this. No, you're not. And if you don't want to believe, random guy on the internet like me, you don't have to, because there are plenty of biologists, there are plenty of geneticists who he could talk to tell him all this and to explain it in a way that might make more sense. But he doesn't do that. He just talks to someone whose basic argument is, yeah, I mean, that's how I learned it when I was like in ninth grade too. Therefore, it's the only way of looking at this. That makes no sense to me. Again, you're Dawkins. You could talk to anyone you want. Why don't you? But he never does. He also says people just magically declare, I am this, as if it's like you just wake up one morning and you decide, which, again, if you talk to trans people, that's not how it works. Gay people don't wake up one day either and just say, oh, hey, I'm into guys or whatever. Like, it's never just, you just declare it and then it's true. It's just not how it works. It bothers me that this guy, I've read his books, I've read his science books. He goes into so much nuance into how evolution works, what the myths are and why people get it wrong. And let me explain to you why why the details matter here. But then when it comes to this one subject, no nuance, no interest in talking to people who are actual experts in the subject. By the way, I've heard this online so many times, like, Dawkins is a scientist. How dare you try to tell a scientist he's wrong about the science? He's a zoologist who got his PhD like 50 years ago. He is not necessarily an expert in all things science, and he certainly hasn't, kept up with everything in the field ever since then. He does a wonderful job, admittedly so, explaining the thing he knows about, which is evolution and that sort of those issues. He knows it, he understands it, he probably has kept up with a lot of that stuff. But to assume, this is not about Dawkins, this is about everyone else complaining online, to assume he knows everything about science because he's Dawkins. No, the dude doesn't work in a lab every day. He's not like a working scientist. His whole thing has always been he's a science communicator, and more power to him. He's really good at it in certain subjects. This one, he just does away with nuance. He doesn't care about the specifics that so many trans people have been trying to tell him for years. And this is not new. We'll talk about that too. Here's another clip I wanted to share with you. And this is, I believe the story here is he got a letter from a child who said she went to a school where being gay was seen as cool and being trans was seen as cool. And then this little girl thought, well, then I want to be gay or trans, which I don't want to pick on this anonymous child. Maybe she did feel that way, but I do find it weird that like being LGBTQ is like the cool thing to do when most of the LGBTQ people I know would say, high school wasn't necessarily fun, even if you didn't live in like a red area or a red state. Being out was not an easy thing to be because you got harassed and bullied. So I don't know where this girl goes where like it's cool to be trans. But okay, setting aside her simplicity there where she's like, well, it's cool, so maybe I'm trans or maybe I'm lesbian or something. Okay, 9-year-old, good for you, whatever. Dawkins just assumes that's true. And then let me play this clip for you here.
I've got here a quote from a girl from America. I think she must have been about 12 when this happened to her. She says, I was in a very liberal school. And she says there was so much peer pressure to either be gay or trans at this school. Basically, it felt like you weren't cool if you were heterosexual. This made me even question myself quite a few times, even though I'm heterosexual. I know that this pressure can be real for so many children. Some of them may actually be gay or trans, and I will definitely support them and fight for them in the end. But that's pretty young to be labeling yourself in any permanent way, in my opinion.
Yeah, one of the things he said there is peer pressure and even teacher pressure to really go against reality and affirm trans kids. Like, there, first of all, I don't know what peer pressure there is to be gay or be trans, but even if there was, it doesn't make you gay or trans. So that's the first thing, that he thinks that peer pressure to be trans or declare yourself trans is a thing. It's not. But the teacher pressure, like, where are these teachers who are like, I'll give you extra credit if you're going to be trans? They're not there. They might say, tell me your pronouns. I want to respect you. Tell me what name you go by. I want to make sure I'm calling you this, so it's not an obstacle to me educating you. But that's not teacher pressure. So I'm dying to know, what is this peer pressure and teacher pressure to go against reality? But also, it wouldn't make a damn bit of difference, because none of that pressure is what makes someone gay or trans. Like, Dawkins could have set the child straight and said, well, it doesn't matter what the pressure is, because you have to figure this out for yourself, and it's not something you're going to figure out on a whim. He parrots her misunderstanding of the situation. Like, I think there's this belief in right-wing circles that because more people are coming out as gay or trans, and I know someone in the comments said, like, why are we lumping them together? They're not at all in the same vicinity. They're not the same things. That's absolutely true. But if more people are coming out as gay or trans, like, that's because in some cases it has become a little easier to do so. Doesn't make it easy. It's just easier than it was in the past. And that's a good thing. It means there's less stigma, fewer obstacles to overcome. But it's not because someone pressured you to do it. It's because those people were always there, but they felt hidden. They felt like they had to be in a closet, and now they feel a little safer coming out. Dawkins seems to interpret that sort of thing as pressure, including pressure from, teachers. No, it's not pressure. It's a sign of respect. Dawkins says throughout the interview, he does respect trans people. He will call them by their pronouns, their names. And yet, as soon as people do that, like, he just resorts to belittling them. He mocks them, whatever it is. He also said in that interview, like, J.K. Rowling is very brave, which is news to me, because a billionaire who just says stupid things and then gets criticism for it, that's not bravery in any sort of way. Okay, so I just mentioned Dawkins says he is respectful of trans people. Here he is saying that. Let me show you that clip.
I'm perfectly happy to address a trans person by their preferred name and preferred pronouns. I think it's just a matter of politeness, really. What I object to is the insistence that I am a woman. I mean, you're not a woman. I'm perfectly prepared to call you she if you like, and call you whatever your preferred name is. But to say I am a woman is a debauching of language, and that's where I draw the line.
Yeah, it's the language that's the problem. Dawkins is fine with trans people, but do you know what really grinds his gears? Grammar. Like, what are you doing? And first of all, if you're saying I respect trans people, I'll call them what they want to be called, but also in your head you're thinking, aha, this person is lying. That's not respectful in any meaningful way. So I don't know why he thinks he deserves credit when he's basically saying, I'll say it to their face, but, Helen Joyce, let's talk about why they're wrong about it. But also, when he says, like, what I object to, this is the quote, what I object to is the insistence that I am a woman. I mean, you're not a woman. Like, right there, you're giving away the game. You don't actually believe that they're trans. You're just doing this to humor them. But also, going back to what he said earlier, I don't know what he thinks trans people are doing. They're not suggesting their chromosomes have changed. They're saying, this is who I am. This is my gender identity. And he's like, no, you're not. I don't buy it. Like, what are you trying to say here? Okay, I'm going to step back for a second. Here's what I think is the problem. This is a guy who's been globally famous since he was like 25. Everyone in the world who cares about this sort of science stuff, evolution stuff, they've all known his name his entire life, his entire adult life. He's always been the guy in the room that everyone wants to talk to. And now he's at the point in his life where he can be surrounded by people who just treat him like he's the smartest dude in the world. And he's not exposed to enough people telling him, okay, but on this issue, you're full of shit. No one is telling him that. No one he works with is telling him that. And if they are, he just ignores them. But like, no one here is saying, you claim you are being respectful to trans people, but you're not, because of everything else you say around that line. And so he just keeps using this misinformation, the pigeonholing of what trans people must be like. And I think one example of when he did this is when he talks about sports. Let me play that one.
Let's talk about sports for a moment. Somebody who's a moderately good swimmer as a man, but kind of mediocre, and then suddenly just says, "I am a woman."
Yes.
And because he says I'm a woman, he's then allowed to go and break all the records of female swimming. That seems to me to be unserious. You're just saying you're a woman because you want to say you're a woman. Whereas if you've been through the surgery.
But he's still not a woman.
But there's a sort of feeling that he really means it. He's sincere about it.
I mean, I could say I was sincere about being astronaut. It doesn't make me an astronaut.
Christ. So Dawkins, I want to just make sure I'm quoting him correctly here. Dawkins said someone who's a moderately good swimmer as a man, but kind of mediocre, and then suddenly says, I'm a woman. And because he says that, then he breaks all the records. If he's talking about Leah Thomas, the college swimmer, that's not what happened there. Like, I'm looking for an example of a male swimmer who then just says, I suck at this sport. You know what I should do? I should just say I'm a woman and then go beat all the women. No one is doing that. If they are, they shouldn't be allowed to, but that's not what trans people are doing. Like, who does... Do you remember there was a survey that came out a while ago, and I don't have it in front of me. I'm seriously riffing on this, but it was like a substantive percentage of men think they could beat like Serena Williams in a tennis match because they're maybe moderately good tennis players as men, but they think, oh, well, she's a woman, I could beat her. And of course they couldn't. Of course she's the best player ever. You know what I mean? But they all just have this overconfidence. Dawkins is basically suggesting the same thing, that if a guy who's a good swimmer, moderately good, but even if he's better than that, if he's good, he could just suddenly declare himself to be trans, and then he would be allowed to compete against women, and then he could just beat them all. And like, where does that happen? He never mentions it because it doesn't happen. The NCAA has rules about what the qualifications have to be before a trans person can compete. And none of those rules at the NCAA, at the Olympics, none of the rules say you just check a form and say you're trans and now you can compete. None of those places work that way. And I'm shocked that this is like the place so many conservatives have landed on, that they think all these male athletes are just declaring themselves trans so they can win like random meets. Let's hypothesize that is what's happening. Why would anyone declare themselves trans and go through all the shit that trans people have to go through for life, by the way? It's not like they're doing this to win a swim meet and then they transition back or something. Why would they go through all that to win what? A college swim meet? I follow sports. I could not tell you who wins any college swim meet. I couldn't tell you who wins male college swim meets. I don't know what they get for winning. Maybe a medal. Who is going through all of this shit, pretending to transition, to use Dawkins' idea here, in order to win a random tournament that no one gave a shit about? Like, for all these people who think Leah Thomas or anyone else did this to beat women in swimming, like, name any other college swimmer who won some national tournament. Name the record holder in college swimming in any event. You can't do it because none of these people give a shit about it. It's all play acting for them. but also like what happens after college, because it's not, unless you're going to the Olympics, maybe your career in swimming is basically over. How many endorsement deals are these champions of women's swimming getting? I don't know. I rarely see them. I can think of like one female swimmer, Katie Ledecky, who's not trans, and she wins all the time at the highest level. And that's like it. I don't know who else is at the top of their game. I don't understand what the argument is here, because it doesn't match how college sports works. It doesn't match how professional women's sports works. But Dawkins thinks you can just wake up as a shitty male athlete, pretend to be a woman, and then just go play. No one allows that to happen. And you would think the Olympics, the NCAA, you would think they have a vested interest in making sure this is competitive and fair, and whatever qualms there are about both of those organizations, and there are plenty, they do want to keep it competitive and fair. That's kind of the thing that their whole business revolves around. So they are taking this issue as seriously as they can. Even if you go to the NCAA's website, you can see like who's on their committees to decide how they should incorporate trans athletes into sports. It's not like the president of the NCAA is just deciding this on a whim. They are consulting with athletic organizations, medical organizations, to figure out what the right way to do this is. And I don't know if they have it right. I am not an expert in that area, but it absolutely is not what Dawkins says it is, which is where a mediocre male athlete suddenly just says, I am a woman, and then gets to play. Not how it works. Of course, Helen Joyce never corrected him on this because she doesn't care either. I don't know where that's coming from or what he is talking about there. I had one more clip from this particular interview, and it involves Dawkins insisting he and he alone and people like him are the true victims in all of this.
Constantly it comes up that if you dissent from that, you're called a bigot, and so people don't want to dissent because dissent, and so I don't want to call it cowardice, but it's pardonable cowardice because nobody wants to be called a bigot. But why does all the abuse go one way? Why is it such a, why does all the bullying go one way?
Why does all the bullying go one way? Because when we talk about trans people, you know who really has it rough these days? It's all the bigots. They're the ones who suffer. It's never the trans people who literally have hate crimes against them. By the way, I have this written down. I'm just making sure I say this right. 20 states have considered or passed laws banning gender affirming care. Some of them are either on the verge or have already done this for trans adults. This isn't about kids. Those laws wreak havoc on their families when trans people are in the public eye because, they took a breath. They are inundated with trolls, and I'm sure it's happening in the comments right now. But Dawkins is like, all the bullying goes one way. It's always the people who deny their civil rights who are like victims of criticism or something. Here's what Dawkins is mad about. One time, a couple of years ago, after he made other anti-trans comments, the American Humanist Association said, we once gave you this Lifetime Achievement Award, and it's kind of the only leverage we have against you because you don't work with us. We don't have any partnership with you or anything. So you know what? Just out of principle, to show that we stand with our trans allies, we rescind the award we gave you several years ago. And everyone flipped their shit over this. An award that, name the person who won the Humanist of the Year award last year. You can't do it because none of you care. But Dawkins is like, someone took away my award once, and that is so much worse than what trans people have to go through. Unbelievable. And look, let's put aside all of that. Let's say Dawkins thinks he is an ally of trans people because he calls them she if they ask him to, but he denies everything else and he thinks trans people are lying to themselves. Let's say all that's true. When trans people are fighting, when allies are fighting about trans rights, it's really not just about like, accept the fact that I am trans. It is all about, hey, there are laws that a lot of Christian nationalists support that are here trying to make sure I can't even use a bathroom in a public space, that I can't compete on a middle school athletic team or something like that, that I can't be who I am in a public space. In Florida, you can't, if you're a teacher, you can't ask them to call you like Mr. whatever or Mrs. whatever. You have to go by what your birth certificate says now. Like, that's what so many of these fights are about. It's letting trans people just live their lives without people getting in their way. Dawkins doesn't say, okay, on all of those issues, of course we should support trans rights, whatever qualms he has about it. He doesn't say, okay, but of course I'm an ally on those issues. He doesn't talk about them. It's always, well, trans people are lying to themselves. You know, I'll call them whatever they want, but nothing else. Nothing else matters to him. He doesn't even care about the issues we are arguing about, because the fights we're having in state legislatures and in Congress and stuff, it's not about what's the chromosomal makeup of trans people. It's about, should they have basic civil rights? And it's appalling to me that Dawkins doesn't even get on board with any of that stuff, or he doesn't bother himself to speak out against that stuff using the platform that he has, which reaches so many other people, because he thinks he's the bully. I think I'm bothered by this because it's not that Dawkins made me an atheist. I was an atheist long before the God Delusion came out, but I like his books. I say that in the present tense. I think his writing about evolution is really good and clarifying, and I learned more about the subject from reading his books than any other science books I've read, than anything I learned in a classroom. I would argue he is one of the best long-form science writers ever, and yet somehow he's also like the worst short-form writer ever on Twitter, which I'm amazed that that's the case. And again, the reason I care about this, it's really not about just picking a fight with a famous atheist just for the sake of it, or because I want to be like the atheist. That's not it. It's because he is the go-to guy for reporters and people online as the atheist. If people are writing an article about the rise of the nuns or why organized religion is failing, I promise you, they all want a quotation from someone like Dawkins, if not Dawkins himself. And this is a guy whose whole shtick is, I can teach you how to think critically and logically and reasonably. And if your whole thing is, I can help you think critically and spread, what was his foundation called? Like the Richard Dawkins Foundation for Science and Reason. And if that's the thing you're basing your whole reputation on, then why the hell is your whole game now spreading bullshit about a topic you know nothing about? Especially when, given your platform, you could talk to experts in this field. But instead you go to some like third-rate journalist who doesn't have expertise, but has just written stuff in, prominent outlets spreading the same sort of lies. That's who you talk to all the time. It also bothers me that the Center for Inquiry, which merged with his foundation, has refused to officially break ties with him, speak out against him. I'm not saying that for all the employees who work there, but like as an organization, they haven't done anything about this either. I'll show you one other thing. This is the week before he spoke to Helen Joyce. Dawkins, he posted this thing. I want to see if I can share this with you, if I can figure out what the right button is again. But this is a thing Dawkins wrote last week. Where did it go? Of course, I lost it. It's here, sir. Here we go. This is what Dawkins wrote. Where did my thing go? There we go. This is an article Dawkins wrote for the New Statesman, and it was an article about why biological sex matters. It doesn't matter if you're trans. What matters is whatever your genetics say and how Richard Dawkins interprets it. I'm literally going to jump to the bottom of this article because the question he is trying to answer is, what is a woman? And the New Statesman here that he's writing for had one person argue against, like, it's just what your chromosomes say. And then they asked Richard Dawkins, who is now known for being the anti-trans dude, because I guess J.K. Rowling was busy. hey, can you write the flip side of this and tell us why trans people don't count? And I'm just scrolling down to the very last line here. Here we go. Boom, there's his thesis right there. A woman is an adult human female free of Y chromosomes. That's it. That's the whole thing. It boils down to that. And how dare any of you bully him who say that's kind of overly simplistic and you're missing a whole bunch of nuance and all of that. He wrote that before the Helen Joyce interview. And then this is now the only, like, this will eventually be his next book. It'll be Why Trans Women Are Not Women. It'll be like called The Poetry of Turfdom or whatever it is. This is what he does now. Like, I remember there was a time, my favorite book by him is The Ancestor's Tale. I thought it was the best description of evolution. So in depth. He wrote it with like a graduate assistant too, but like it's so thick and it's so interesting. And it got into all these things I'd never thought about before. And I remember thinking at the time, wow, I can't wait to read his future books about this, because now that he's written the basics about evolution, now he can go into more depth and really explain it for those of us who know a little more about evolution. And then he kind of pivoted to writing like a basic science book for kids. And it's like, well, that's nice. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people will appreciate it. And they did. I mean, people did like that book. But I'm like, I mean, that's nice for the newbies. That's nice for people who are just learning about science. But can you go back to writing stuff for like slightly higher education levels? The people who read your books and accepted those books and liked them, like write a book for us to learn more about evolution. And he's totally not doing that. This is what he does now. It's just he needs to see your karyotype before he decides whether or not to respect you or something. That's what bothers me. Like, it bothers me that I don't feel comfortable recommending his books anymore because of what he's become. I feel like a Harry Potter fan who's like, I can't tell you that these are good books anymore because they're just so tainted by what their author has become. And it's really frustrating. I don't know. I've gotten plenty of flack about this online, so I know there are plenty of people who disagree, but it's appalling that this is what he's become.